Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our outstanding witnesses here today. President Trump has declared that he will not comply with congressional subpoenas. This blanket categorical disregard of the legislative branch began with the president's refusal to cooperate with regular congressional oversight and has now extended to the House's constitutional duty on impeachment, the reason why we are here today. This disregard has been on display for the American people. When asked if he would comply with the Don McGahn subpoena, President Trump said, quote, "Well, we're fighting all the subpoenas," unquote. Now, we've discussed here today the obstruction of Congress article impeachment against President Nixon, but I think I'd like to go a little bit deeper into that discussion and juxtapose it with the President Trump's actions. Professor Gerhardt, can you elaborate on how President Nixon obstructed Congress and how it compares to President Trump's actions?
As I was discussing earlier and included in my written statement, President Nixon ultimately refused to comply with 4 legislative subpoenas. These were zeroing in on the most incriminating evidence he had in his possession. So he refused to comply with those subpoenas, became the basis for that 3rd article, and he resigned a few days later.
Professor Feldman, what are the consequences of this unprecedented obstruction of Congress to our democracy?
For the president to refuse to participate in any way in the House's constitutional obligation of supervising him to impeach him breaks the Constitution. It basically says, nobody can oversee me. Nobody can impeach me. First, I'll block witnesses from appearing, then I'll refuse to participate in any way, and then I'll say, you don't have enough evidence to impeach me. And ultimately, the effect of that is to guarantee that the president is above the law and can't be checked. And since we know the framers put impeachment in the Constitution to check the president, if the president can't be checked, he's no longer subject to the law.
Professor Gerhardt, would you agree that the president's refusal to comply with congressional subpoenas invokes the framers' worst fears and endangers our democracy?
It does, and one way in which to understand that is to put all of his arguments together and then see what the ramifications are. He says he's entitled not to comply with all subpoenas. He says he's not subject to any kind of criminal investigation while he's president of the United States. He's immune to that. He's entitled to keep all information confidential from Congress. Doesn't even have to give a reason. Well, when you put all those things together, he's blocked off every way in which to hold himself accountable except for elections. And the critical thing to understand here is that is precisely what he was trying to undermine in the Ukraine situation.
Professor Carlin, do you have anything to add to that analysis?
Thanks. I think that's correct. And if I can just say one thing, I want to apologize for what I said earlier about the president's son. It was wrong of me to do that. I wish the president would apologize, obviously, for the things that he's done that's wrong, but I do regret having said that.
Thank you, Professor. One of the most important questions that every member of this committee must decide is whether we are a nation of laws and not men. It used to be an easy answer, one we could all agree on. When President Nixon defied the law and obstructed justice, he was held to account by people on both sides who knew that for our republic to endure, we must have fidelity to our country rather than one party or one man. And the obstruction we're looking at today is far worse than President Nixon's behavior. Future generations will measure us, every single member of this committee, by how we choose to answer that question. I hope we get it right. I yield back.